I was looking for a T-34 kit to build, and I saw the Academy Berlin 1945 kit, and I thought that looked pretty interesting. I was on eBay, and I found the kit for $35 with free shipping, and it came all the way from Seoul, South Korea. You can see with the box it got roughed up a little bit in shipping, but after unboxing everything, all the parts were fine. A lot of models have a bathtub style hull, where this one is in multiple pieces. With the Tamiya extra thin cement, you glue everything and you have quite a bit of time to work with it, like in several hours. Painted the shock towers flat black and then painted the shocks and highlighted the springs. I thought might be able to see them. In the end it all got painted over, so probably outthought myself a little bit there. Rear pieces for the drive wheels. When I glued those on, there was a little bit of a gap on each side I ended up having to fill. After building Tigers, the T-34 has a lot less road wheels. They're all in two pieces, you just simply glue them together. And I started putting the stowage boxes on the model, headlight, a horn. Thought that was kind of interesting that a tank has a horn. At least I think that's what it is. The rear photo etch. Had a little bit of trouble with that. I ended up bending it, rolling it over the my X-Acto blade handle, and I tried to get it to fit better. And with the photo etch grill in the back, there's also real small strips you have to glue on. Those were a little bit of a challenge. I ended up having to tape them down and wait for the glue to set up. But after getting everything in place, it looks pretty good. There's some rivets you can see. Clamp the sections of the turret together. I wanted to get a nice tight bond so I wouldn't have gaps I had to fill. And during different steps in the construction, I have to reorganize myself and clear the clutter off my bench. The turret, you can see some of the hooks and the lift lugs, the grab bars. Here we have the turret cupola with the vision ports and the two hatch halves. At least actually there's four pieces to the hatch with the sight in the top. I added the photo etch brackets to the front of the hull and also added the big towing lugs. The lugs are actually four pieces, but I can't put the top piece on until I have the cables in place. Here I applied filler to the back where I had the gaps, got those sanded out. Not a big deal. Used squadron putty. Same with the turret with the small inserts in the front. I had to put a little bit of putty in there. Then I went ahead and primed it with Tamiya white primer to check and see if I had any gaps. I taped the turret hatches in place for priming and painting, and didn't glue them in case I want to put a figure or two in the turret later. And you can see the upper structure and the hull fits pretty good. The rear fits real good. And I had a little bit of trouble with the fit in the front, and you can see that I had some gaps there. I ended up having to put a bunch of putty in there and getting that fixed up. And once again, I used the squadron putty. It dries real quick, and then just sanded it out. So I painted the tank and all the small parts with, to me, a fine surface primer. Really like that primer. It goes on really light and fine and gives you a nice base coat. I used the WWII Soviet camouflage paint. Only end up using 3 of the colors in the camouflage paint kit, and I also used a real light green from MIG. And my airbrush is a Badger Sotar. First paint is the real dark green. Then came back with a lighter protective green with the light coats. And here you can see some of the modulation where the dark areas and the lighter areas are. After painting everything with the dark green, for the wheels after that I try to spray vertically down onto the wheels so I can keep the dark shadows in the corners and recesses. Then the final coat of Russian green, and I lay that on pretty light. Painted the return rollers and drive wheels with silver paint where they would have contact with the tracks. Used Karaya tow cables, really like their cables. Just cut them to the length that I needed. I don't know what the scale length is, but that worked out for me, and I did some measurements and cut them as long as I needed to have them cut. I took one of the 2 shackles in the kit and drilled it out, used a staple for a pin so I can connect the cables together in the back. Here I added the top parts of the big toe lugs. I had to have the cables in place before I can add those pieces. And once I had the tow cables in place in front, then I started routing the cables back and bending them to the shape I wanted. I've been using this Vallejo rust stain and streaking paint kit. It's a really nice kit. The instructions are great and you're almost guaranteed success. I typically use these 3 colors. Actually, it's 2 colors and a wash. You can get pretty good results with it. At this point in the construction, I made a decision not to use the bed spring armor. I've never built a T-34, and I kind of like those iconic fuel canisters on the back of the tank, and I really wanted to have those on my model. So I went ahead and added those. The instructions don't tell you where to put them, so I referenced some photos online, and I think I got the tanks pretty close to the right spot. Here, adding a little bit of effects to it, some rust and chipping. Start adding some staining where the fuel fillers are. I added some oil paint filters, and I use this color mixing guide so I keep my mixtures in that green, yellow, brown spectrum. And it's a pretty subtle touch, but it adds some pretty nice highlights. The decals in this kit are horrible. They're probably the worst decals I've ever seen. And I spent a bunch of time getting these decals snugged down to the irregular surface on the turret. And no kidding, I spent like 3 hours on these decals, and I must have put 30 coats of microsol on them and ended up working them down into the surfaces with that yellow micro brush. And I went underneath a magnifier and just pushed and pushed. I don't necessarily like using a clear coat because it tends to mute the colors. But with these decals, I had no choice because they were silver around the edge of the white letters or the white numbers. But after 2 heavy coats of dull coat, that silvering on the edge completely disappeared, so I was pretty happy with that. Pretty hard to have a model tank without some dirt. So I used some pastel chalks, got into the areas where dirt would typically build up in a set of road wheels. I used this Vallejo European mud, stippled it on with a crappy brush. I don't like it. It's I just don't like it. It's glossy, and I won't buy it again. I don't like it. Came back over that mud with pastel chalks and covered all that up, and the irregular surface looks like it's dirty under there. And we're getting to the home stretch. The construction of the model is pretty much done. It has a couple coats of dull coat over the entire model. Road wheels are in place. Everything's glued down except for the rear drive wheels. And it's time for some tracks. Bought some Fruil tracks for the model. I love these tracks. You know, I've never used another brand of tracks, but I like these so well, someone would have to really convince me to try something else. They're terrific. I start by, I drill all the tracks, every single link, because I don't want any problems down the road. Come back, file them, then I use staples, put them together with staples. Once I have the length set, I can take the tracks apart, lay them out, and then duplicate the one side and have 2 matching sets. To finish the tracks, initially I paint them, well, here I painted them with NATO black, you can use flat black, and came back with dark rust, kind of a wet coat, got into all the little nooks and crannies, and I used a piece of foam and dabbed the foam on there and stippled it with the light rust color. Then after that I used the wash, came back and washed all the tracks. Once I have the tracks rusted, it's time to come back and add some pigments and simulate earth. And I just brush them down, make sure I get the pigments down into the little nooks and crannies. Once that's done, I come back with some 70% isopropyl and soak them down real well. That's it. I used a little bit of real light tan pigment and dusted the inside of the tracks. And that's the end of it. The model's done. I hope you like it.